If you're watching this video, you are probably stressing a lot about your interview in the next few weeks, and I'm here to tell you that there's no point in trying to learn anything new at this stage, and obviously there's no point in stressing about your interview. If you're new here on my channel, welcome. I was a Cambridge Mathematics undergraduate from 2017 to 2021, and immediately after I did a PhD in applied mathematics also in Cambridge, and as part of that I got the opportunity to be an interviewer for the mathematics undergraduates that were applying to my college at the time. So I have experience of both being a very nervous undergraduate applicant that was trying to get in to study mathematics at Cambridge College, and then 5 years later or maybe 6 years later being on the other side, being an interviewer. So I'm going to share how it was my experience as an undergraduate in my interview. Actually, I had 2 interviews, and also how was my experience interviewing for a different college than the one that I applied to study. So it was a slightly different format, and I'm going to share my advice based on my individual experience, but also the experience of being on the admissions panel for my college, trying to make decisions on which candidates to move forward with, to make an offer to, or which to send to the pool. This is going to be very biased to Cambridge. I'm not sure how it might be different in Oxford, but I guess the general principle of the interviews and what we are looking for when we are assessing applicants, that still holds for Oxford. So I'm going to start with my own experience when I was applying in 2016. Before my first interview, I had an exam. I think it was 90 minutes, and I was just put in a room, and it was an exam that had 2 sections. One were like short questions, and I think you were expected to do all of them, and then they had more trickier questions that I think you were only expected to attend 1 or maybe 2, but those were longer, like they might take you like half an hour or so, and each of these long questions have different parts, so you didn't need to get a full answer. You know, if you made progress, that was still good. And when we finish that exam, you don't hand it there, you take it to the first interview. So the first interview was based mostly on that exam. At the beginning of the interview, they did ask some very soft questions, like, oh, you mentioned your personal statement, you mentioned this book, why did you like it? But I think in retrospect, those questions, they are not really evaluating you for that, other than just checking that, you know, you actually wrote your personal statement and you know what you're talking about, but they're not looking for anything in particular other than to make you relax, to get you settled in, get your nerves down. So my advice would be, don't worry if they ask you like a question that's not technical, like for mathematics interview, a question that's like, oh, what do you think about this view, or what do you like this part of maths more than this other part? Don't worry about that. That's just to get you started before you actually get into the details, the questions that they might have, or in my case, the questions that I had tried to solve in that exam, and I was just explaining to them how I attempted to solve them. And actually, I remember that I left fairly satisfied that interview, because in one of the difficult questions, I think I had done fairly well. The short questions, I had done them, and they were like, okay, yeah, this is right. And then in one of the trickier questions, I kind of had made progress, but then as I was explaining to them my answer, I kind of realized that I had made a mistake. And I mean, it was a long time ago. I don't remember exactly if I realized on my own that I had made a mistake, or they kind of gave me a hint like, oh, there's something wrong here. But either way, I eventually like corrected my answer with some of their help. And this is one of the things that they're really looking forward. Not looking forward. They're really searching for, is that you have the ability to like correct and like evolve your thinking, especially if you're given hints from them, because that's what happens a lot in the undergraduate system, when you have supervisions and you kind of have to learn from your supervisor that's helping you understand the content. So that's what they're looking for, not whether you know a specific like mathematical theorem or not. At that stage, they're not assessing that. So that's why I'm saying you don't need to be like learning now theorems, that especially things that are not like that you're not learning in school, like that's fine. Like you don't need to learn those things. You just need to be yourself, like confident as a mathematician, solving problems. Or I think this applies to like any other subject really. Like you don't need to have read a specific book or theory or experiment or book about, like, you know, if you're applying to the literature or whatever. You just need to be able to reason in a way that is suitable to the course you are applying to, and the interviewers will help you do that. So don't stress about learning specific things. And this is especially important if you are an international student like I was. I was coming from Spain. I had no idea what like the A levels. I mean, I knew what the A levels were, but I had done a very different curriculum, and I think at the time I was overly worried in trying to learn that curriculum to prepare for the interview. Of course, later on when I got the offer, it was important to fill all the gaps in my knowledge to be able to do a step, but that's not your worry right now. Your worry is just getting through the interview. And so if you are the interview and they ask you to do something that you very clearly know that that's like a part of mathematics, but you haven't covered that yet in a school, you just tell them, like, just be yourself and tell them. And that's what happened to me in my second interview, where you know, that exam that I had discussed in the first interview, like that was over and done, and I actually left fairly satisfied that first interview. But then in that second interview, where it was just like no exam or like prepare question, it was just the interviewer asking me things to do, and eventually at some point he was like, okay, can you integrate this function? And I knew that I hadn't covered integration yet in school, because in Spain we did that in the very last semester and we were in like December. So I told him, and it was fine. He just told me, okay, then, you know, we're just gonna keep doing differentiation, or, you know, something else. And it happened again with like something from physics, and I mean, I don't remember exactly the details, but I think eventually we just found a topic that I had covered, and he kept asking me questions on that. And eventually what happens is that they ask you a question that you don't know how to solve, or you get it wrong. And that's kind of how all interviews end, at least in mathematics. And that means that you're gonna live unhappy, because you got to a question that you didn't know how to solve, and in retrospect you will find the answer was obvious or whatever. But that's why it's very hard to tell whether you have done poorly or well, it doesn't mean that you did poorly because you failed the question. Like, because everyone fails, eventually it gets harder and harder. So at the time I didn't know that, and I was very disappointed. Like, I cried a lot, and I thought I wasn't gonna get in, that I had no chance, because I didn't get right that question, and that was the end of the interview. But that's how it's designed. It kind of always ends with a tough question, because then the interviewer knows your limit, and that's fine. And your limit might be enough on one day, or might not be enough on another year, and that's how it ends. And the reality is that you can't do much about it, and there's no point worrying about it right now or trying to learn anything new, because if for some reason you're like looking online at a forum or whatever, and you find a question from another year that someone has shared online, and then you happen to get the same question, like, these people, like, they've been doing that for many years. Some of the interviewers, they can tell when you already have seen the question, and you're not like, you know, you're just spilling out the answer. You are not making the reasoning if you don't understand it, or it's very clear that you've seen the question before. You're not thinking through the steps if it was new. So in that case, like, honestly, just tell them, oh, I've seen this question before, and they will say, okay, thank you very much for not wasting my time, and they'll give you another question where they will be able to test your thinking and your reasoning skills from scratch. So that's why there's also no point in trying to see questions that you might get in the interview. Of course, it's good to have some practice if for the interview, if you have someone at a school or maybe like a friend that is able to practice the interview with you, but that's more so that you feel confident in talking to another person about maths. Like it can just be one of your peers from a school, honestly, even if they're not like applying, they're not having interviews, just get them to ask you questions. That's all the practice that you really need to pick yourself. So that's basically my rant. Don't stress about it, and after the interview, just don't worry about it, don't ruminate on it. It will be whatever they decide to do, but there's no point in thinking that you didn't get it right. You might actually have gotten in, and that's what happened to me, and I spent 1 month thinking that I hadn't. So just don't do that, and good luck. And if you're having interviews, please, it will be great, like let me know in the comments below. All the best of luck for everyone, but it would be nice to see if there's someone like watching the channel that has an interview, how it goes for them. And also, if you could subscribe, you can follow my journey in academia. I've been giving a lot of advice recently on like PhD stuff, but I have not forgotten about that earlier part of my education in university, and I make some videos for younger people as well. So please subscribe. It really helps a lot to keep me motivated and making videos. Good luck.